No, that was my.
It will record just fine.
It's recording right now, but I'm going to stop it right now.
Do you have another? Yeah, I'm gonna go make some.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to get started. I know most people know who I am. So, Dr. Marie Paraszczuk, and what I'm going to be presenting today is some information from what we fondly refer to as the mountain measurement. So just to give you some background and where this all began is back, I guess it was, I would say probably the end of the spring semester, or maybe actually after the spring semester was over. Jennifer Menino had come to the Center for Nursing Research and Scholarly Practice asking us to analyze this information that was in the mountain measurement reports. And so after much discussion, we decided that the deliverable would be what this is, and this is a presentation of really the kind of the key information from this report. And I'm going to begin with a disclosure. I have nothing to disclose. I had no financial support, nor did I receive any financial benefit for doing any of this work. It's, I don't know, maybe brownie points, and maybe not, who knows. So the first thing that I found that I needed to do was to figure out what this mountain measurement was, because I really was not familiar with it. Back in the fall semester of last year, you know, this past academic year, Marie Osborne had come to me asking me to just kind of fill her in on the assessment work that I had done previously. I was no longer on the undergraduate assessment committee. She, along with a lot of others, were on the committee. So she wanted to just touch base with me about some of the work I had done previously. And so after we talked for quite some time, as she was getting ready to leave, she said, "And have you ever used the mountain measurements?" And I was like, I didn't even know what they were. So, like everybody else who needs to get information, I Googled it. And what I found was Mountain Measurement is actually a company who does this. They're a psychometrics analytic company, and they do this analysis of NCLEX data for the NCSBN. And so programs can obtain information about their program outcomes by subscription. So the subscription is actually through NCSBN. And there's a variety of options. You can get anywhere from quarterly to annual reports. It depends on how much money you're willing to pay. And the reports are actually containing already analyzed data. So you can, if for an additional fee, you can actually obtain the spreadsheets. But for the basic fee, all you get is the report. So the way NCSBN does their reporting in terms of their annual reporting period, we, as best as I could tell, get the reports annually. So the reporting period starts April 1, ends March 31st, and what's included in that time period is all first-time candidates who are, candidates who are testing for the first time. So those people who have failed previously who are testing again during that time period are not included in this report. It only includes first-time test takers that took the test between this time period, April 1st to March 31st. So one of the issues that I recognize right away is it doesn't quite align with what we were looking at, because we are looking at academic, or at least I could say I was looking at academic years. You know, I looked at the December grads, I looked at the May grads, and then I looked at the academic year as a whole. And it doesn't quite match for a lot of reasons. First of all, you know, particularly the December grads, those who take the, and you know, because they're eligible usually by February to take the exam if they graduated in December. So those who take the NCLEX in February and March are included. So, for example, somebody who graduated December of 16, if they took the NCLEX in either February or March, they are reported in with the March of 16, with the year-end, you know, data. They're included in that April 15 to March of 16. and they're not included with the rest of the May graduates of that academic year. Now, some of the December graduates, if they didn't get to take the NCLEX or didn't schedule or whatever, they waited until April or May, they will be included. So there is somewhat of a split that's going to happen with our December grads. So we don't get a real picture of an academic year. It's really only those people who took the test in that particular time period. So, and I'm going to just basically kind of go through what the information that I took from these reports, and then they should be, I don't have that many slides, honestly. Then we can, we'll, have some discussion about it, hopefully. So that the important piece to also recognize that this report only has aggregated data. There is no individual information in this report. We don't know. From this report, we don't have individual names. We don't know who those people are. Now, can we figure out who took the test between April 1st and March 31st? Yes, but that's not included in the report. So that's an important piece to understand about it. So what we find in this report is it compares our performance to previous years. So it compares our grads to grads of previous years. And there are also comparisons to 3 other groups. The group in our jurisdiction, which for us is New York State. The other group that we're compared to is all similar programs, which is all baccalaureate nursing programs throughout the whole country. And the last group that we're compared to is all nursing programs in the entire country. So those are the 3 comparison groups. And so in this particular presentation, what I had available to me was the reports from these 3 years, 2014-15, 2015-16, and 16-17. So one of the things, that I was able to do when they report your first-time pass rate, and again, this is not by academic year, but by their period. In the first report, which was the 14-15, they actually provided the data from the first-time pass rates from the previous two years. So I was actually able to plot our first-time pass rates over a 5-year period. So you can see, we were at a good place, and then we went down a little bit, and then we went back up. Not a real wide swing when you really think about it. But anyway, this is what our first-time pass rates from March of 13 to March of 17. This is the last report that we received, I guess, was toward the spring or early summer, was included what period that closed March of 17. So the other information that they also provide for us is the number of test takers, first-time test takers in that same time period. So this is really what this chart depicts. So the blue line is the number of graduates who tested during that time period. This was the number, the red is the number that we're passing, and this was our percentage. So what you see here is, we had this little upswing in the number of graduates who took the test in March of 15. But what you might also notice, oops, sorry, it's a smart board, I guess.
Yeah.
What you might also notice is that we were, in terms of our number of graduates passing, was flat. So, but because the number of people who took went up and the number who passed kind of stayed relatively the same, our first-time pass rate declined at that point in time. And then, fortunately, the first-time pass rate did go up again. Again, we stayed relatively stable in terms of the number of people passing, but the end where that percentage is derived changed. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, so this is our beginning the comparison to those other groups. So March of 2015, here's our first-time pass rate. We were at 72%. And when you look at New York State, other baccalaureate programs nationwide, and the national group, we were kind of lower than everybody else. But fortunately, as our first-time pass rate increased, this picture changed a little bit. So you can see we were actually, for March of 2016, we were actually higher first-time pass rate than New York State, but still below baccalaureate programs, and pretty similar to the nationwide group. And the picture gets even better when our first-time pass rate went up to 88%. We were higher than both New York State and the national group, and pretty much on par with the group that included similar programs, nursing programs granting a bachelor's degree in nursing. So, so this is something I think we should be, happy about, certainly. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So the other thing that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and I do have to apologize to Rose, because Rose probably knows all of this stuff that I'm saying, because she's looked at these reports. But I wanted to bring that background about what's in these reports for those people who may not be so familiar.
100%.
NCLEX text plan we're all pretty familiar with, because we're living it all the time. So, the client's needs categories, some of them are, subdivided. So we have these 8 client's needs categories. Why are these important? Because regardless of how many items a graduate has on their NCLEX exam, the percentage from each of these categories are consistent with this test plan. So it doesn't matter if they have 75 or they have 265, this percentage. And so, management of care, 16 to 23%. So that means that every graduate, regardless of how many questions they take, the percentage is going to be within this range. And so this is important because when it comes to some of the other dimensions that they, kind of slice and dice into other dimensions, it's not as consistent in terms of percentage. This is the test plan is consistent in terms of the percentage. So what I'm going to show you again is some comparison, and this took me a while. I don't know how many times I've read this, but it took me a while to figure out what was going on here. And so when you look at this next chart, it is going to be a percentile rank. And what they basically do is it's not that they do averages or, they don't, it isn't an expression of how our students did, but where our median performance ranks with, again, those other comparison groups. And the one that I'm going to show you is our comparison to New York State. So basically what they do is they look at our performance in these various categories, and they kind of find that midpoint where half the students are above that point and half the graduates are above that point and half the graduates are below. It is not an average. They use medians as opposed to average because average is much more sensitive to outliers. People who did very well or very poorly can throw that off a little bit more, so they use the median. So essentially what you're going to see is how our median performance compares to New York State. And God bless them, this mountain measurements people actually kind of can identify this based on item difficulty, because there is, scaling in terms of item difficulty, and we know that students who pass in 75 questions have gotten more of those difficult questions early on and not as many of the items that are not so difficult. So somehow or another, magically, I'm not really sure how they did that, they have made an adjustment for item difficulty when they have determined that median performance. So this is what it looks like. So here's your category. I know this is a little bit busy. It's a little bit of a busy slide. This is the categories, the subcategories rather. And so the bars are by years. So blue is the 14-15, red is 15-16, green is 16-17, so the most recent year. And then I thank very much Larry DiFiore who helped me with this, because I'm not so good with Excel when it comes to making graphs. But so this line here is the 50 percentile line. So you look at these categories and look at where we are. And we're, for the most part, pretty close. sometimes a little bit above, sometimes a little bit below that 50 percentile line. And then again, this graph only compares us to New York State. So really there isn't, you do see some fluctuation. You do see some variation from year to year to year. Of course, our first-time pass rate increased over those 3 years, so it's not surprising to see that green bar, for the most part, is, higher and meeting that 50 percentile line. So there is also, I could have made a graph, I didn't, in the interest of time, and you could also do the same to compare us to nationwide baccalaureate programs and all of the nursing programs through New York State. The pattern is really not very much different in terms of the pattern, how it looks. Our numbers are a little bit lower. Does that make sense? Yes, it's a much bigger sample that we're being compared to, so it's not surprising that our numbers are a little bit lower, but they're not way lower. So it just kind of looks the same more or less, except just dropping the percentiles a little bit. One of the very important pieces of information that's contained in these reports is the caution in terms of how you interpret these percentile ranks. So, and one of the things, specifically that they mention is that when you're in the middle of the rank, the differences between the percentiles is much smaller than when you're at the ends. So a program that's, up in the, 90, 91 percentile range is going to be a little bit different. That's just because of the numbers and how the numbers play out. So really their recommendation from the NCSBN is to really use this information not as, precise, numbers, but to kind of just look at your program's strengths and weaknesses. This is really the purposes of giving us this information. As I mentioned before, in addition to those, clients' needs categories, they also kind of slice and dice the questions into other categories, and these are all these other dimensions. The nursing process, categories of human functioning, which kind of sort of is like, Gordon's, the nutrition, elimination, that kind of thing. Categories of health alterations, what has to do with your body systems, cardiovascular, et cetera. The wellness, illness continuum, stages of maturity, which really, divides into, newborns through elderly, and then stress, adaptation, and coping. And I'm very pleased to see that, and Deborah Hanna hopefully is able to connect online. I think she's in that they use Roy's adaptation model in the reference. So it made me feel good that at least there's some nursing theory that goes into this. It's like, why else are we doing this then? But yes, that is the only one that's cited, but it is cited in the reports. They have charts that compare our median performance to all those other groups, but the caveat is that, it's very likely that test takers are not going to have enough questions in these categories because it's not set by percent of the questions. That sometimes if they didn't have answer enough questions in, say, the wellness illness continuum, that graduate is not included in this chart. So again, it's for informational purposes only. You really can't use this as the absolute. There's some other interesting information in this report as well pertaining to NCLEX test duration. So this is, again, the same colors in terms of, the years. The percentage taking the minimum number of questions and the percentage taking the maximum. So the minimum number of questions is 75, but there's actually only 60 scored questions because 15 of them are pre-tests or, testing items. The maximum is 250, and again, everybody gets 15 test items, so the maximum is 265. So you look, you see, especially as we look over the years, that the number of students that are passing with the minimum number of questions is about half. The number, and I do have to make a statement here about this word failures. This word failures is not my word. It comes from the report. I usually don't refer to people that way, but I was consistent with the terminology they used in the report. So you can see here for 2015 and 2016, about a quarter of our students were failing pretty early on after 75 questions. So this was a little bit different than, again, you can actually glean from this report how these numbers compare to those same groups, New York, baccalaureate, and nationwide. So this was actually much higher than, higher than other groups. The range that I saw was usually 16, 17, 18. And of course, this all is derived from these two numbers. So, so that I kind of found interesting. The percentage taking the maximum number of questions, no surprise here, to me at least, that a very small percentage of those who pass actually have to take the maximum amount of questions. Where you can see about a third of those who fail have to take the maximum amount of questions. So I found that interesting. And then another piece of information that you can get from the report is the average test time in minutes. Again, not to belabor the point, not surprising, those who pass are at it for a little bit shorter period of time than those who fail. So what is it? I mean, the most important thing for all of this is to identify what it is we learned from this report. And so, the number one thing that's really important is that there's going to be differences in outcomes from year to year. We are not testing the same people twice. You get into that first-time test taker category once and never again. So from year to year to year, there's different people in those groups by year, so it's not surprising that there's going to be some differences. One of the things that, and again, this is not a statistical relationship, this was not data that I could manipulate or analyze in any way, just an observation that I made, that this is an observation that there's maybe a relationship between the number of graduates and first-time success. Again, just an observation. It's not a really big difference. If I can go back to the slide, but there was actually from in 15, it wasn't that much of a difference, in terms of, it was like 30 more test takers. So it wasn't, we're not talking about big numbers. So whether or not it would really be statistically significant is a different, story, but I noticed this observation. This is really the good news, is that we are pretty much hovering, very near that 50 percentile rank. And I think this is, good. This is a good place to be. Given our mission, I think this is where we should be. If we, based on our mission, we're at the 90 percentile, I think I'd question whether or not we are consistent with our mission. A lot of people look at this and say, 50 percentile, mediocre, right? In the middle. Well, I mean, the good news is we're not at the bottom. And, to some people's disappointment, we're not at the top. But like I said, given our mission, should we be at the top? We're giving people opportunities that may not have them otherwise. We're not pretending to be George Washington University or Villanova, where they have very, very, very stringent, entrance requirements. Even the school where my son goes, Clemson. I happened to, when I went there for orientation, of course, I made my way over to the nursing group, even though he's not, he's in the engineering program, but to find out that they took 100 students. They had over 800 applicants. But, their mission is different. So, I mean, I think that's, and, you know, after pouring through that CCNE document, you know, to me, what's probably the most important thing in the CCNE is consistency. And, you know, they look at mission. It's one of the, you know, I forget what they call them, criteria. It's 1A, 1B,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, above all, we have to do what we say we're doing. So if we were really high up, I think it would come in question. So I think we are, here's my little clap of cancer, I think we're at a good place. You know, we don't always feel that way, but if we are at a good place, I think, based on everything else about what this college is all about. I mean, I think the other piece that we can take away from this is, you know, looking at, you know, those categories in terms of trending. Again, what I think we have to be very, very careful about is to go back and try to find one thing that causes this. Because there can't possibly be one thing that causes that. These students come to that test, not what just I taught them in my 349 and 359. They come to that test with everything that everybody in the nursing program has, you know, done, plus everything in the whole college, plus everything else that they have.
Their life.
Their reading comprehension, their test anxiety, their way they feel that day, what's happening with their sick father. I mean, all of that stuff is in there. So we can't look at this and say, at least this is my opinion. So, and you know, people who know me know that once I get to the end part, I'm always on the soapbox. So if you want to just shoot me down, tell me to shut up. This is, you know, this is not something we can, you know, look at in terms of one course, one part of the program. There's no way. Basic care and comfort is one of those threads that has to go through the entire program. It's just as much an important part of my course as it is as the other courses. What it sometimes involves can be a little bit different than what, you know, it might involve in another, you know, course in another population. So, you know, again, we look at the trends. We have to look and see. This is one of the areas that, you know, I know from when I did my dissertation, and I was looking at 09-10 graduates at that time, that, you know, with ATI, I didn't have this information with my dissertation, but the ATI scores in 9, 10, and 10, 11, both those years when I looked at it, the basic care and comfort were the lowest ATI scores. Because ATI also, you know, categorizes similarly to NCLEX. You know, so I think the responsibility is for all of us to try to identify what's going on and figure out what, you know, what's happening there. You know, Eileen and I talked about this because there is some overlap. When we look at basic care and comfort, we don't really know what those questions entail. So that's number one. We don't really know, does something fall in safety or does it fall in something else? It's a little bit hard sometimes because we don't get to see the questions. And there's conflicting priorities. I mean, I know that from my own practice. You know, I have a mother who's got a, you know, 18-month-old in the hospital, and now she has to go because she can't find anybody to pick up her other kids from school. So she's going to leave. Now, what do I do with that 18-month-old? She's been holding him the whole time. Now she's got to go. If I don't have somebody that can go in there and sit with that kid, I got to put the kid in the crib with the side rails on. Safe for safety. Do you think this kid's very comfortable? No, he's screaming his head off. They don't want to be in there, especially when mom's gone. So to maintain, keep him safe, I'm not keeping him very comfortable. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, I think that there's a lot of times where that's, you know, I'm just an example from my own practice, but I think a lot of times that's what happens. You know, is that conflicting priorities. And maybe as they get further on into the program, into complex care, we focus so much on some of these other things that we don't focus enough on the basic care and comfort. Perhaps. might, again, I don't know, because what this, and I've read every word in these 3 reports, it doesn't give you the why. I think it's up to us to figure that, out and to see what we can do to try to address it as a group, not as a, one little part of the group, but as an entire group. So what else do we learn? We talked about this already, that, I think we should be proud of the fact that about half of our graduates pass with the minimum number of questions, so I think that's good. We did see the improvement in 17 as our first-time pass rate went up, that the number of graduates who failed in the minimum amount of questions came more in line with what we're seeing in those other groups. And so this we talked about already. The passes, most of them don't, or at least half of them don't take very few of them take the maximum amount of questions, but you see that more typical of the people who fail. And I think those results in terms of about the average test time support our practice in Molloy to keep test time limits for our exams that we give in the classroom. So, as well as ATI has, time limits also. There is some argument to that, but I think this supports that. In the end, I think the most important thing is to just really, take this for what it is and use this information to make improvements. Recognize that we're not looking at individuals here. So this isn't going to help us in some of the other things that we might want to do, because we don't have individual data in these reports. So this is the question that I put up is really, how do we best serve our students? I think, and I've been saying this all along, that data collection and analysis should be ongoing. It shouldn't be done just, because we have an accreditation visit coming up, or because we had a dip in our scores, so let's look and see what happened. It should really be something, that's kind of done on a continuous or periodic basis, or at least the collection done continuously and periodic assessment, evaluation. So, I think all of these things are an important piece to how we best serve our students. Looking at admission and progression criteria, looking at all of the things that, we do, not just in nursing, our curriculum and our NCLEX preparation, but other things that the college does, in terms of preparing students to, graduate. And I think the other piece that I think, and I also have been saying this for a long time, I think it really behooves us to identify those students who, who are at risk, not because we want to target them, but because I think they're going to need a little bit more in the way of support to, we do that sort of initially with the remedial piece, but how much do we do that as they get through the program? So this is, the most important thing to recognize is it's not fun, it's not easy, and really it's behind the scenes kind of stuff. The students, most of them don't even know that this goes on. They have no idea. They don't see this. They see, bouncy houses and barbecues. They don't see this. It is so vitally important to them, but they don't know about it. Part of that may be naivete. Part of that may be just not being an educated consumer. Sometimes their parents may ask, but I have to tell you, I'm guilty of the same thing. I sent my kids to 3 different schools. I made the assumption that the school took them in, that the school felt that they had what it took to graduate from that school and that program. I didn't really pick it apart to see how many people come into the engineering program at Clemson and actually finish. I was guilty of the same thing. So this work is primarily to help the students, and they don't even know. They really don't even know we're doing this. So that's one of it. Why I kind of say unsatisfying, because that's part of it, what the students don't see. what the students see is that when a student comes in who couldn't get into any other school, comes into this program, graduates, passes NCLEX, gets a good job, they're happy. The students with the outcome the opposite, they're not so happy. And of course, who do you think they blame? They blame the school. For a variety of reasons. They feel that you didn't prepare them properly. Maybe, I was having this conversation with Ronnie last week, the feeling that, well, you didn't give me what I needed to graduate. Maybe you didn't have any, you didn't believe in me to begin with. So, it's a fine line. We have to be careful when we identify those at-risk students to not make them feel like, we don't believe in them, or make them feel like, listen, we don't want you to be lower in our NCLEX scores. So we have to be careful. But, the other reason why some of this work is unsatisfying is because on some level, somebody's not happy with the results. When I was working with the undergraduate assessment committee originally, our first meeting, the main focus was admission criteria. Everybody was focused on admission criteria. And not to say this negatively in any way, but, because I fully understand where they were coming from. It's like they were kind of hoping that our work was going to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that we needed to take stronger students with higher SAT scores and higher averages. And so guess what? It didn't show that. So they weren't so happy. Leadership wants us to show that beyond the shadow of the doubt, everybody that we take into the program has, the equal chance to be able to be successful. And we couldn't show that either. So in the end, nobody was happy. Is what it comes down to. So, it's a lot of work, but I think it's very, very important work. I've always felt that since I started doing this work as part of my dissertation. I've always felt that this is really, really important work. I think part of that may be because of my own background, because, I spent 18 years in staff, staff development, working as a clinical nurse specialist. Clinical nurse specialists never get the routine cases. We always get the problems. We're always facing the problems. Things are going well, we don't get involved in that, right? We only deal with the problems. But I was very, very involved I came into that role, that leadership role, at a point where QI was becoming the buzzword. And so I kind of grew in my leadership role with QI all the way. And so I did a lot of it before I came here in the hospital. It was a major part of the role that a major part of my role, when I was in my hospital work. So, I see that as it's really just continuous quality improvement. So I'll shut up now. Questions? Discussion, actually. Was there any questions about anything that I presented?
Anne-Marie, I think I know the answer, but just curious, they don't collect any data on primary English speakers versus...
No, that's not included in this report.
And it's not collected, the National Council doesn't do it?
Not that I know of. If they do, it's not
shared.
It's not shared in this report, yeah.
I mean, because to me, particularly that piece about timing, I always look at it as an advantage that a student or graduate who had English as their second language could indeed be successful because it wasn't a time test, so to speak. They could take longer, answer fewer questions, but answer them correctly. But if
they have that information, which they may, then
I don't know that they've ever asked.
Because I do in the application process. I think there's some information that they have to provide. I don't know.
I don't know if that's it though. But I mean, that would be, just out of curiosity to me, if that would play a part.
And I believe they do allow testing accommodations also for NCLEX as well.
100%.
Right. But again, we don't know how many people in our program met that criteria, et cetera.
Right.
So we don't know about that. So it would be interesting. I don't really know, when they present that average time, do they pull out those people who already have accommodations? I don't know that either. Because that could obviously change things. So, I I think in some cases people may need more time, but just my experience in the classroom, I don't know how anybody else feels. If I let them keep that exam too long, I also see racing. I mean, they don't have the opportunity here because once the question goes, they don't come back to it. So once they've answered, they never see that question again, so they don't have the opportunity to change. But I think more time can mean more reading into the question information that isn't there, which I see happening a lot. Because I mean, I just did test review the other day, and they're like, "Well, but if it's this, this, and this," I'm like, "But the question doesn't say anything about this, this, and this." So I mean, I don't know how well to use this information to make things better. I think some of it isn't so much the information that we have here, but the information that we have internally. I think we have to look at our admission criteria on a regular basis. I think we have to also look to see if there's some straying from that admission criteria, and I might turn the recording off at this point.
I can remember how to do that. Hang on.